We're now setting up our main comp for animation. So let's double click on our main comp, and there's nothing in it. Let me change back to my V arrow tool. And we are going to grab our background comp and drag it into our main comp. And then we can reposition it so that it matches up with our 1920 by 1080, that red guide layer. This is our starting frame. And then from here, we can double click inside that background. It brings us into the background comp that we were already working in before. And now we're going to replace our FPO with the snowman character comp, the puppet comp. So let's select the puppet comp from our elements folder, drag that into our background comp. And now we have the higher resolution snowman in our background scene. So we can twirl down our snowman comp or press S to reveal the scale attribute. And we can just scale it down so that it matches our FPO snowman, our for placement only snowman. So again, notice that the scale attribute has two coordinates, X and Y. After Effects is a 2D program, so we are only dealing with the X and Y axis here. And this link will link the proportions of X and Y. If I unlink it, then I can start to achieve some squash and stretch just isolated on one axis at a time. But I'm going to keep them linked so that I can scale the snowman proportionally. Okay, so we can eye it pretty closely. And then let's go inside the snowman. And I'm going to, instead of turning off this background color, because obviously out here we don't want to see that block of the background color. But inside here, if I'm animating on this level, it's still helpful to have a color card, a background color there. So instead of turning that off and on, I'm going to set this background layer to be a guide layer. And you'll see those blue guide marks from earlier that we turned off. Now I've set my entire background layer to be a guide, which means that if it is nested in a comp, that layer will be turned off. So now I can just match up my puppet on top of the FPO, and then now I can turn off the FPO. I don't need that at all. So I used this icon here. This is called the mini flowchart, and it's an easy way to navigate back to the main comp. I mentioned at the beginning that After Effects, like the basic building block in After Effects, are comps, and we end up animating in comps and putting them in other comps. And so it's just going to be learning how to understand there's different levels of animation. But you can get lost in all those nested comps, and so this mini flowchart icon is a great way to navigate back to the level above. Okay, so let's set the anchor point on the snowman puppet comp. Press Y, get that pan behind tool or the anchor point tool, and we're going to move this anchor point also to the hips or where the ground is. And then we're going to start animating this snowman. The snowman is basically sliding across the screen and then comes to a stop. I can also turn off my 1920 by 1080 guide layer now. So I'm going to press P for position, turn on that stopwatch, and let's say at 1 second in, I'm going to move this keyframe, press Shift so that it clicks right to where my timer is at 1 second. And this is my starting keyframe, my starting position. The snowman is going to glide And at 6 seconds, the snowman will be across the screen. So let's switch back to our regular V arrow tool. I'm going to move this over. If I press down Shift, it will level it and then let go. As soon as I let go, there is a keyframe made. So if I play this, After Effects is interpolating the in-betweens. It's creating those in-between positions for me. Between these two, essentially, these are the key poses. To jump from keyframe to keyframe in After Effects, you can press J and K to go back and forth between your keyframes. I'm going to turn my rough layer off also. There's different kinds of keyframes in After Effects. This is called linear. In Harmony, it's called a motion keyframe. In After Effects, we call it a linear keyframe. There's also other kinds of keyframes in After Effects, as I mentioned. This one is linear. It's shaped like a diamond. If I right-click here, on top of the keyframe, I can toggle it to a hold keyframe. And a hold keyframe is a square shape. So if I move the snowman comp, and I move the time, every time I move it, it creates a hold keyframe. In Harmony, this is called a stop motion keyframe. And if I play this, you'll see the difference. A stop motion keyframe or a hold keyframe in After Effects will basically just hold it in that position until the next keyframe comes over. So this is a good way to kind of mimic paper cutout, like a stop motion paper cutout kind of animation, especially if we put our hold keyframes on 2s. I'm pressing plus and minus at the top of my keyboard to zoom into my timeline here. But if I animate on 2s, I can get some really refined motion that could almost feel like stop motion. For now, we'll just continue on with the linear keyframes for our animation. I'll change this back to linear. Okay. Now, linear keyframes is pretty easy. You don't have to do in-betweens. You're only doing your beginning pose and your end pose, but it's rather boring and mechanical. So we can add an ease on it. So if we right-click again on that keyframe and go to Keyframe Assistant, then we can add an easy ease on that. And then now you can see how the snowman slowly eases out of that position, and then we can add an easy ease on the ending keyframe so that the snowman slows in or eases in to that. We can further customize our easing in and easing out. Let me save by using this graph editor. So Graph Editor will now show us visually the velocity going in and out of those keyframes. So click on the second button from the left down here. There's actually two kinds of graphs that we have access to, but when we're dealing with customizing our easing in and easing out, we want the speed graph. Select the layer, make sure you're selected on the attribute with keyframes. Select this little box. This is your keyframe, and this yellow handle will allow you to adjust the easing in and easing out. And so remember, this is the speed graph. We're looking at the velocity in terms of X and Y axis of how this snowman is easing out of this position. So that's super gradual, then it'll speed up, and then it slows down. And we have our basic animation already blocked out for this scene. We've got some easing in and easing out, but it's still rather boring. So let's start to add some character animation, and we're going to do an anticipation. So an anticipation happens before the action. So let's anticipate the snowman by giving them a rotation. So I twirled down all of the attributes. I turned on the stopwatch for rotation to match my position keyframe. And let's rotate them backwards a little bit. So I put a keyframe there, rotation 0. Let's back up in time and let's rotate them the reverse direction. A nice anticipation always goes in the opposite direction of the action. So we can play that. Okay, it's a little mechanical, and so this is, now that we have our key poses, this is where we can start to click and drag our keyframes around to start to get some overlapping of these attributes. I'm even going to start the snowman at 0 so that they rotate back and then start to slide forward. And of course, I can now use the graph editor to add easing in and easing out on these rotation keyframes. And press plus or minus to zoom in. And here, I'm actually going to rotate the snowman just a little bit forward to show that he is leading this action with the head almost. Okay, so we have some anticipation now. Now let's add some overshoot to this animation. So overshoot means that the character will go extreme. They will go past our last key pose here. So an overshoot, I'm going to accomplish that by rotating it further. So I'm going to add, let me zoom out a little bit. So you can see I only have 3 keyframes for my rotation. I don't need, if I'm animating with, let me press U here, and then J and K to go between all of these keyframes. I only have 3 rotation keyframes. If we're animating on linear keyframes, the fewer keyframes you have, the better. The rest of the motion you're actually controlling with the graph editor. Okay, so at some point, okay, I want this rotation. I'm going to copy and paste it to about here because this is where my overshoot is going to start. And the overshoot is rotating even more. And then after you animate the overshoot, there's always a settle. So a settle is when everything kind of comes back to its neutral position. So we've got anticipation, we've got the action, then we've got overshoot, and then settle. So let's see. Let's slow down the settle. Okay, and then let's go to the graph editor. Add an ease. Okay. I'm pressing shift as I grab this timer so that it snaps to the keyframe that I had originally. And I'm just going to exaggerate this overshoot just a little bit. Rotate them just a little bit further. Almost like they're about to topple over, but then they catch their balance. Okay. And then you can always adjust the timing too, just by selecting multiple keyframes and sliding them around on the timeline. Okay, and I'm gonna push this back. Okay, and then we'll save. So we've got our antic or our anticipation. We have the main action going from left to right. Then we have our overshoot, and then we have our settle. Now let's go inside the snowman comp and add a few more flourishes such as squash and stretch to help us really sell this animation. So before I go in there, I'm going to decide what I want to do. I'm going to add a squash in this moment here. So as the snowman is going to squash as they ease out of that left position. Then they're going to straighten up about halfway through. So I'm going to line it up at time 1 second. Then I'm going to double click, go inside my snowman comp, the puppet comp, and we're going to animate some squash here now. So let's shift select the head and the body, and let's press S to reveal the scale attribute, and we're going to turn on the stopwatch. It's going to automatically set a keyframe at 100% scale. I'm going to move this into the past just a little bit by a few frames, because this is the neutral position at 100%. I want the squashing to kind of be in effect at 1 second. So I'm going to unlink these attributes, and at this point, we need to parent the head and the body. So let's try squashing the body on the Y axis, make it just a little shorter, and then also stretching it out on the X axis. So it's just a tiny bit here. And then let's come out to our mini flowchart, come back to our scene view, and see how this matches up. Okay, so the squash is happening too soon. I'm going to actually move that keyframe to be, I think, closer to here. So with my timer lined up on this keyframe, I'll come back inside my snowman and I'm at the exact same time. I'll just move this over. And now my squash will line up with the action happening on the upper level. Okay. I can also add an ease in here. Let me change this graph. Oh, it is a speed graph. Oh, let me link these two. All right, so I want it to ease into that squash. Okay. And then let's come back up one level. Okay, at some point, right, I don't want the squash the whole way. So I think maybe around here, I want it to ease out of the squash and go back to its regular shape. So around here, let's go back inside the snowman comp. I'm going to add a keyframe right here. And then I know at some point I want it to return to a 100% scale. Right, so that it returns to normal. So let's come back out, see how that plays. Okay. All right, let's try adding some ease out. See if it feels a little bit more natural. And then let's watch it in the level above, in our scene level. All right, so let's save this. So this is one way to add a little bit of dimensionality and more fluidness and flexibility by adding swash and stretch. Now, on the shows that I worked on, such as the Wonder Pets, it was a stylistic choice for us to actually never do swash and stretch by animating the scale. And so we instead would animate the position. So I'll show you with the head here. We would animate the position. If I wanted the head to squash, let me unparent this also just to show you, right? So here the body is squashing on its own. We would instead position the head down. And this would be our squash. So it was a stylistic choice to not distort each layer. And so we would animate squash with position. We would also add a little bit of rotation too. So I might rotate the head down just a little bit. And this is why those anchor points are very important, that you're placing them properly, right? So now this also feels like a squash, and I'm not distorting the head at all. I'm just positioning the head down and rotating it down just a little bit. Grab the head layer, right? And so the hat, the face, everything is attached to that head. Everything rotates down. And we can still add ease here, just a little bit. And by the way, on the Wonder Pets, we actually also stylistically did not animate it on linear keyframes. So we were animating on hold keyframes at 2 frames. I'm sorry, on 2s. So we were animating on holds, on 2s, to really mimic that paper cutout stop motion style. So yeah, stylistically, we were not using linear keyframes, and we would rarely use the scale to do our squash and stretch. Okay, so I'm gonna rotate the head back up. I'm gonna snap, shift, drag my timer to this keyframe so that I know I'm going to add keyframes here. So I'm going to know that I need to rotate back up from this point forward. So I can change this head rotation back to 0. And then I can also raise or position the head up. So I'm pressing the up arrows. Okay, and we'll just add a little bit of customized ease here. Let's save, then come back to our background. All right. And I might just want to offset this just a little bit less. And if I offset these keyframes here at this level, I might also just want to go back inside the snowman and adjust this if I need to. So it's a little bit, it can feel a little bit clunky animating characters and scenes in After Effects because you kind of have to separate in your mind what is being animated on what level. So on the character comp level, we're doing our main blocking action, you know, just so going from left to right, the main antic, the main overshoot and settle. But inside my character comp, on all these separate layers, this is where I'm doing additional squash and stretch. If I had different mouth shapes and eye shapes for different expressions, animating dialogue, that would all be done inside the character comp level. So then what happens at the main comp level? Well, that's where we would do camera moves. So now let's animate a pretend camera with position and scale. We can animate a pan and a tracking in. So we'll follow the snowman as if we're tracking with the snowman. First, let's just sort of reposition so the snowman's not at the total edge of the frame. Let's start our camera here. And then as the snowman moves, that's when I want the camera to start moving. So I'm going to select this and shift, snap it to my time. And then I want the camera to follow it. So I'm going to click and hold down shift and move this over. And I also want to zoom in just a little bit too, as if we're focusing on the snowman's face. Okay, so the snowman seems to come to a stop before the camera does, so I'm just going to move this over. And then we can add easing in and easing out on these as well. And save.